This is the Generation UCAN podcast, episode number 5. Today we chat with biohacker and author Dave Asprey about his brand new book, The Meaning of Being Bulletproof, Nutrition Biohacks, and the benefit of using UCAN SuperStarch at night. The Generation UCAN podcast starts now. Welcome to the Generation UCAN podcast. I'm Varun Shriram, your host as usual. We are excited today to be joined by a very special guest live from the Rodale office in New York City, fresh off promoting his brand spanking new book. It's biohacker Dave Asprey. He's the founder of the Bulletproof Executive, the creator of Bulletproof Coffee, and the author of the Bulletproof Diet, available now wherever books are sold. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Doing well. It's been an amazing week launching the book, and I thank you guys for coming here so we could do this live. I appreciate that.
It's great to meet you in person. I'm joined by Seth Bronheim as well, Director of Nutrition for UCAN, and Seth and I are both big fans of your work, so it's exciting to meet you in person. And, you know, Dave, in introducing you, we refer to you as a biohacker. It's something that we hear more and more, kind of in a host of different industries. What is, in your words, a biohacker?
When I started blogging about 3 years ago, I made this infographic that's still on the website. That's like, what worlds are we bringing together around biohacking? And after chatting with a bunch of people, there's a formal definition, and it was the art and science of changing the environment around you and inside of you so that you have control of your biology. And rather than trying to just change your biology directly, going and inserting a new gene or something, what we're doing is saying your body is so responsive to the environment. Why don't you just change it? And the environment includes what you put in your body, what kind of food and what kind of air, what kind of light, and how do you choose to do things? Because all of these stress inputs or things that are stress reducing or things that provide fuel, they change how you think, they change how you focus, they change how you physically move, how much strength you have. So there's all these variables we never pay that much attention to that really control us.
So what sparked your interest in this? Why weren't at some point you were probably listening to traditional science, what you were being fed through mainstream sources. What made you explore this alternative?
I was fat as a kid, and in my early 20s, I hit about 300 pounds. And it sucks to be fat. And believe it or not, fat people actually know they're fat, and they try and lose weight. So I got really serious after I had 2 knee surgeries. I'm like, good God, I'm still young. I feel like I'm old. So I worked out for 18 months. I did an hour and a half a day. I did half weights and half cardio, and I cut my calories about 1,800 calories. So I'm really low fat, really, really focused. Nothing else matters. It's my top priority every day. Didn't lose the weight. I got really strong, but I was still fat. And I looked around one day and I felt guilty, and it was I just wasn't trying hard enough. I need to eat even less food. And I looked at all my friends. They're all thin. I'm like, I eat less than all my friends. I actually do. I'm looking at Carl's Jr. and I mean the salad with no dressing, and they're all thinner than me, and none of them even work out. I'm like something's wrong here. And I realized it wasn't me. It was that something else was going on, and that it wasn't a lack of effort or a lack of something else. It was simply that what I'd been told to do didn't work. So I changed what I was doing, and I started experimenting. I ended up losing 50 pounds when I eliminated gluten, kind of accidentally, experimenting with more of an Atkins style approach. And the other 50 pounds was really hard to lose. And along the way, I got really bad brain fog, cognitive fatigue. I made $6 million when I was 26 years old at a company that you could say created modern cloud computing. Google's first servers were in our buildings running our network, things like that. It was a very pivotal time in the creation of the cloud computing as we know it today. So it was an amazing time. The only problem was when you're 300 pounds and you're getting your brain turning off all day, every day, and you're an entrepreneur, it's just not acceptable. So I ended up spending $300,000 in 15 years working on solving that problem for myself. And really, once I got to the point where I was at a reasonable weight, I'm like, well, wait, I can probably do better. How do I make myself, better, faster, stronger kind of thing along the lines of what's important to me? I, by the way, lost that $6 million when the company went bankrupt, but it was a good time, and it did help me invest in myself. And I started writing about all this just because it's not fair that I got to do that, because by all rights, I probably should have been like still 280 pounds and tired all the time and have had a pretty awful career because my brain didn't work. But I was lucky. And I just thought sharing the knowledge with someone who might be in my situation would be really helpful, because no one wrote that down for me. And if I'd had that, it would have completely transformed what would have done with my life. I spent so much effort on this. It's not necessary to spend the effort when you have the understanding.
So a big element of this was, self-experimentation. Where were you turning to for knowledge, resources, as you were trying to cultivate this new approach?
Well, I started by going to my doctor and I said, I think vitamin C helps me. And he said, vitamin C will kill you. You have to stop. And I said, well, what about Linus Pauling? And if you're listening and you don't know who he is, I apologize. But Linus Pauling got 2 Nobel Prizes and was one of the pioneers of vitamin C. He took 90 grams a day, etc. The doctor said, Linus who? And I just looked at him and I said, you're fired. Like, you're not competent. And I left his office. And I was angry at doctors for a long time. And I recognize now that I was at the wrong kind of doctor, and I was probably a young, arrogant jerk too. So when you sort of unpack all that, I went to the normal medical profession. It didn't work. When 4 years later, after I completely just self-studied all these things, I went into a functional medicine kind of doctor, before we called them that. And I said, look, I have one of these 7 things going on. I'm not exactly sure, but it might be like an insulin glucose signaling thing. It might be mitochondrial dysfunction, but here's all the tests I want to do. And she was like, no, what the hell? Like, okay, like, let's start at the top of your list. But it was a doctor who was willing to listen to me, because I had become so conditioned from having doctors tell me, maybe you should exercise and lose weight. I'm like, maybe you should go screw yourself. Like, I exercise more than you do, right? And it doesn't work. It was that just frustration that led me down the path of self-experimenting. And now with the internet, it's simple. It's so easy. But back when I started doing this, it was an early search engine. It was actually Alta Vista before Google was really cool.
I remember that. Yep.
And I found Smart Drug News, which was a newsletter in the 80s and early 90s by Steve Folks, who wrote a book about smart drugs. Since my experience was I'd always been fat, but my brain was turning off. It was scary. So what do? You start taking smart drugs. So it turns out I'm now friends with Steve, and he's one of my mentors, and someone who's an advisor to the anti-aging nonprofit group that I run, called the Silicon Valley Health Institute. So just having access to people like that, to be able to ask them things, and then to do my own research and all of that, really, really has helped me to understand the different levels of how you support your biology. And that's one of the reasons that I'm excited to get a chance to talk to you guys, because you're doing something pretty unusual here. There is a usefulness of carbohydrates in the body. And there's a group of people who will say, essentially, you can live forever on 0 carbs. And I know people who can do that. Like they really, it's amazing. I tried. And I for 3 months I did like a high calorie experiment where I was trying to gain some fat, but trying to do it to sort of look at calories in, calories out, and just see if it worked. And I thought I would gain 2 pounds, but I would eat enough calories to gain like 20 pounds and be like, wow, like the equation doesn't work. What happened though was that I felt amazing, and I lost weight, even though I upped my calories and cut out most exercise. And I was eating high fat, sort of bulletproof style diet. But then I said, I'm going to try the Eskimo style thing. So I cut my vegetables down, and I did 1 serving of vegetables a day, and the rest was fat and protein. And bad things started to happen. After a couple months of that, my sleep quality went down. I'd wake up 10 times a night without any recollection of waking up. I used a sleep tracker, so I knew. My eyes were constantly dry. My sinuses were dry. And I just felt this overwhelming fatigue. And so what do you do then? You eat more butter, right? The only problem is it stopped working for the first time. And I'm like, all right, there's something going on here. And what I had done was I had cut my carbs so much that I couldn't make enough mucus. Your tears and the things that line your sinus, and more importantly, the lining of your stomach is made out of polysaccharides, mucus. So I was not converting protein into carbohydrate efficiently enough to make the lining of my stomach. And I gave myself food allergies to a couple of my core foods because I gave myself leaky gut through lack of any carbs in my diet. However, I know people who eat 0 carbs and they're monsters. They're completely healthy and happy and amazing. It's individual. So I'm stoked to talk to you guys because you're one of the people doing like pioneering work on starch, or one of the companies, I should say. You are people doing that. And it's remarkable because in the Bulletproof Diet, I actually wrote about resistant starch and saying, well, there's some usefulness for this. There's a gut biome effect. And then there's an absorbability effect where you actually get energy from starch. And if you want to perform really well, maybe having some energy from fat and ketones and some from glucose, God forbid, at the same time might be the highest performing state you could have.
That's fascinating. So we're going to get to that. That's a great teaser. We're going to get to that in just a second. But talk to me about this this idea of bulletproof executive, bulletproof diet. That's a term that you coined, correct?
Well, I mean, bulletproof, we've all known, bulletproof vests and whatnot, but I did register the trademark for it, talking about it in terms of human performance. The reason I chose it is it's a state of high performance, and it's actually about resilience. So we all know Superman's bulletproof, right? He's actually bulletproof, but none of us are, and we're not likely to be that way anytime soon. So what you can be, though, is incredibly resilient. So when you have the energy to bring it, and where, okay, you might get knocked down, but you get back up, that's the state of bulletproof, where you're unstoppable. And it's there from a mental perspective, even from a physical perspective. Because I was sick all the time when I was a kid, even as a young man, sinus infections every month. I was on antibiotics just about every month for 15 years. I was obese, right? I didn't always have the energy to bring it. I'm like, that's what I want. That's what I'm building. And that's why the name Bulletproof.
So with the Bulletproof Diet, which is coming out available at news stores, bookstores everywhere, is a teaser. What is the Bulletproof Diet?
The Bulletproof Diet is a diet for maximum willpower. Turns out that there are things that happen in your brain. There's conversations in your brain that you're probably not aware of. There's 3 big behaviors, and they're all behaviors that come from, in the book, what I call a Labrador in your head, like a big floppy dog. And if you imagine this dog, you say, look, okay, the dogs are always distracted. They'll chase a stick, they'll chase their tail, right? It's that constantly looking for something thing. Okay? This is a problem most people have all day long because they're trying to do one thing, they end up doing something else, and you wonder what's going on. And then anything startles you, same sort of behavior. It's about scanning for opportunity and threats constantly because you can't turn that off. The next thing that the dog will do is it'll eat spoiled food out of the gutter and throw up an hour later. Okay? The analogy here is, why did you eat the bagels you said you weren't going to eat, and then you did? Why did you? Okay, that was the Labrador taking over. And the final thing that dog will do is it'll find a leg and go hump it. Right? Those are the 3 behaviors that get all of us in trouble all the time. Well, you as an adult inside your head as a human have a prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex is responsible for basically telling the dog no. And here's how the conversation goes for the average person who eats the average diet. Someone sets the cookie down on the table and the dog says, eat the cookie, and you say no. And the dog says, eat the damn cookie, and you say no. And you do this every second until you have said no hundreds and hundreds of times inside your own head. Every one of those was a decision. And we've just shown in the past 5 or 10 years that decisions are limited every day. You only have so many. So if you spend all day being hungry and saying no to yourself, by the end of the day, you're a zombie. You can't make good decisions about anything else, and you've lost your willpower. So the Bulletproof Diet is about turning off that voice in your head. So you have more physical energy, more mitochondrial energy, but also you've just shut off the cravings because you chose your foods in a way that you just don't have that voice anymore. So you can look at the cookie and go, oh yeah, a cookie, I don't actually care. Part of that is obviously having the right fuel in the body so that you don't have these spikes and dips and crashes, and avoiding foods you're allergic to and other foods that make you weak.
In terms of avoiding those spikes and crashes, you touched on something that, of course, is so fundamental to UCAN, which I'll bring Seth in here to talk about in a moment. But, without giving, I'm excited to really dive into this book tonight. Without giving too much of it away, what are some tips you can offer folks that are listening, 1 or 2 things as a teaser to get them to start turning off that voice in their head in terms of nutrition choices they're making?
I can maybe do one better. I'll give them the infographic for free. This is a roadmap. You print it out, you put it on your fridge, and it gives you pretty much all of the recommendations on one page that you can look at. And you can text 58885. Just text BP Diet in your email address, and I'll just send it to you right now. You can also go to orderbulletproofdietbook.com. And there's 3 kinds of food. There's bulletproof foods that are low inflammation, that make you feel good, that help just about everyone perform better. Suspect foods, some of them cause problems for you, some don't. Until you test the suspects, you're never going to know. And kryptonite foods, which you want to avoid. So at the bottom of the list, there's MSG and gluten and hydrogenated fat, and the things that you really just shouldn't eat unless you're going to die of starvation. And in that middle section, there's a lot of suspect foods that maybe work for you, maybe don't. the biggest point, the biggest tip there, I'd say, is that until you eliminate all of the common suspects at once, you'll probably never know how good you're capable of feeling. I would like the Superman analogy. Imagine that you're Superman and you have kryptonite in your car and kryptonite on Lois Lane's ring. You go home, I felt pretty good. I felt crappy when I was at home, and I felt crappy in the car. And you don't, well, maybe it's that thing, but you have to eliminate all sources of it. So if you're sensitive to gluten and you're sensitive to nightshade vegetables, which a lot of people are, and you only eliminate one, you're like, well, it didn't really work. So you just keep being on this treadmill. So the Bulletproof Diet is all that on one page on a roadmap where you just print it out and just experiment. So be your own hacker is important, but having a roadmap when you're your own hacker, that's what I never had. So that's my advice there is make sure you eliminate all of the things likely to cause the trouble, not just one.
And, we're at the time of the year where people are evaluating their fitness goals, thinking about, focusing on fitness heading into the new year. This is obviously something that's worked tremendously from you. Can just sitting here in the room with you, the passion that comes across, I can tell it's worked for you and tell that it's helped a lot of people. If people are looking at this and putting in the context of, say, a paleo diet, Atkins diet, and they're thinking to themselves, why is this one going to work for me? Why is this one different than other ones I may have tried? What do you tell folks?
There are lots of good diets out there that'll get you halfway there. And I experienced that over and over. I've been a raw vegan. I've been a raw omnivore. I've done Atkins. I've done Zone and lots of other experiments in between. And the difference on the Bulletproof Diet is that things are stack ranked. So it's a spectrum. You don't have to be perfect all the time. And it also has meal timing incorporated, which isn't part of those two diets. So it really matters about when you eat what. So in the morning, if you have carbs, generally you're not going to like the fact that you get food cravings and you get the spikes later in the day. However, if you do consume starch, I tell you when to consume it to maximize your sleep. And a lot of this work came from conversations with a guy named Seth Roberts, who is one of the pioneers in the quantified self movement. And we had conversations like, why after dessert do you sleep better? Like is it because dessert's a bad thing? No, it's not. Like there's actually a role that even some sugar could have. So by moving your fruit from that sugary smoothie you have in the morning to after dinner, or better yet, in the book, I write about using certain forms of starch after dinner or in the evening to change how you sleep. Like that can be important. So there's meal timing and there's meal composition. And I pay a lot of attention to anti-nutrients, naturally occurring things that happen from food storage or just things that foods produce that aren't good for us. Like vegetables didn't grow to be eaten. They put things in them so animals don't eat them. And sometimes those affect us in ways that we're unaware of.
So as we talk about the timing of the food, one of the things that you've sort of explored and been intrigued by is the use of SuperStarch, which is the carbohydrate in Generation UCAN products at night. But before we talk about that, how did you get turned on to UCAN and how have you incorporated, as you played around with it, how have you incorporated it yourself?
About 2 years ago, I started looking at resistant starch. I've been hacking my gut bacteria for a very long time. Like anyone who's dealt with obesity generally has a gut biome, at least a contributing factor there. So for years, I've taken, I don't know how many, $50,000 worth of probiotics, at least I would imagine, over the years. And I never had that many strong results. I found some that would help, but none of them like made my digestion like bulletproof. I can eat whatever I want. I eat the Bulletproof Diet, and when I eat that way, I feel amazing all the time. But if I go out there and I eat, one of my old kryptonite food, my favorite food was cherry croissants. That was like the last food. I'm like, if there's one thing left with gluten I would eat, it would be one of those. And I'm like, those are not worth eating, and I don't have that craving anymore like that. So it's kind of funny. But when you eat this way, your gut biome can be affected. When I went on a very, very low carb diet, I wrecked my gut biome. In fact, I gave myself leaky gut because I wasn't feeding the gut bacteria that way. So I got into, all right, what are the other ways to feed my gut bacteria? And I learned about resistant starch. And it was, I think, a conversation that you guys had with Peter Adia, if memory serves, about how you could stay in ketosis and still consume your SuperStarch. And I'm like, all right, this is interesting because I value how my brain works when I have ketones in my body is really important. I don't want to go out there and eat Dunkin' Donuts. But the ability to have starch and to get the benefits of starch, that really intrigued me. So of course I ordered some and I started experimenting with it.
So Seth, I'll bring you in here for a minute. Let's hit a couple of definitions for what Dave's talking about. So what is a resistant starch, and how does superstarch compare? How's it different?
So usually the definition of resistant starch is a starch that doesn't get absorbed into the body, and it's, most resistant starches can help you feel a little bit more fuller. But the beauty of UCAN is that we act like a resistant starch, and that it's very easy on the stomach. It's also, but the uniqueness is that it's fully absorbed.
Yep.
So every gram becomes blood sugar in your body, and instead of just acting like a fiber that's not fully absorbed, our carbohydrate, it actually releases slowly into the body. If our blood sugar curve looks almost like a straight red line, giving little bits of energy over time, matching the rate your brain and your muscles need fuel, not overloading your body with calories at once, like might be used like with a kryptonite food, where all the let's say your cherry croissant, all those calories are absorbed so quickly they're raising your blood sugar levels. UCAN's releasing slowly over time, and being my own, I guess you call it biohacker, I decided to test my blood sugar with UCAN, and I was 93 milligrams per deciliter. And 3.5 hours later, I was 96 milligrams per deciliter. That was my N=1. And that's when, from a science perspective, just personally, I realized how stable my blood sugar was.
So when Dave talks about avoiding those peaks and valleys, this is exactly what we're talking about with superstarch. And one more thing for you, Seth, I think what might be interesting to folks listening is that there's a reason that it acts this way, right? There is something beyond just, folks like you and I, folks like Dave, using UCAN and superstarch. What was the whole origins and backstory to it?
I mean, this was meant actually for young children who couldn't create blood sugar in their bodies. It's a disease, called glycogen storage disease, and they basically suffer from life-threatening low blood sugar. And the reason UCAN has to be absorbed is because this was what kept these kids asleep throughout the night. They were fed this, throughout the day, and then a few nighttime feedings. And actually, our founder's wife, Wendy, was living this life by the clock because she had to feed her son every couple hours because he couldn't create blood sugar in his body. So now, UCAN is keeping, our founder's son asleep at night, but there's all these other uses. And that's how the company started, because we realized it could help so many different people, whether it's high intensity exercise, it's being used throughout the day as a snack, or for folks to use after dinner at night.
I tried your stuff on a flight to, it was either Australia or Singapore. I'm not quite sure. Normally on those flights, what I do is I throw butter and some of the brain octane, and I'll just make myself a bulletproof coffee. Like, I will never eat airplane food. But on this flight, I'm like, I'm going to give this a shot, right? And I didn't want coffee because I'm working on, the jet lag thing on that flight. I just didn't want to have stimulants because I wanted to go to sleep when I landed because of the timing. So I said, all right, instead of just doing fat, I'm going to try doing UCAN. And I took it. And one of the problems with normal resistant starch, which you guys aren't, is that it will make you, I think the technical term is fart like a machine. and when you're flying in a closed steel tube with hundreds of other people, that might be a bad time to try resistant starch. Just saying. So I tried your stuff knowing that it doesn't have that effect. And yeah, I did get satiation. It's not the same feeling as fat. And I've also tried actually mixing it with the brain octane oil, and it worked well then too, because brain octane bypasses the liver and it goes in, and it gives you ketones. And your starch, the superstarch from UCAN, goes in and it makes glucose. So you're sitting there in an airplane and it's like, okay, like, I don't want to crave that crappy airplane food. And I'm certainly not going to eat it because I know I'll be tired when I land if I do. But all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I feel really good because I've got glucose at a reasonable level. I didn't get a spike. And I've got ketones present at the same time. And that was kind of a good feeling. Like, I'm really comfortable that way.
Well, when you talk about it as a feeling, like, can you kind of isolate, how did it make you feel? What were you feeling in that, on that airplane?
Well, there's a thing, and it's also something I write about in the Bulletproof Diet. What 99% of people call hunger is not hunger, it's a food craving. So if you have to eat right now, you have food cravings. If you're like, it's probably time to eat in the next hour or two, but like, I can handle it. And you're like, if I had to walk 5 miles right now without eating, I could still handle it. That's hunger. And if you're like, I'm going to die if I don't eat in the next half hour, I would kill for a Skittle. Okay, that's a food craving. It just is. And I monitor my hunger levels, not my food craving levels, because I don't really get food cravings unless I screw up royally. So I'm looking at this on the airplane going, all right, like how close to that? It's time to eat now. And I just didn't feel it. Like I just, oh, look, we're getting there. It's an 18-hour flight. I'm good. And the stewardesses are looking at me like you've eaten nothing this whole flight. I'm like, yeah. But it was that, yeah, not, yeah, I'm exercising willpower. Yeah, I'm kind of desperate, but I'm going to man up. I'm just
Yeah,
going to do it.
you weren't saying if you
was,
stick your arm in
yeah.
front of me, I'm going to bite it off, right?
It was effortless. Like that's what I was looking for. So it did help on that front.
The science really is interesting in that because our carbohydrate releases slowly into the body, it stays under there at the pancreas and that it doesn't spike insulin. So, a lot of times the folks have cravings because their insulin spiking and crashing, and we flatline on the hormone insulin. We showed this in our trials at University of Oklahoma on trained athletes that we keep complete insulin extremely low. So we showed that you can actually, burn more fat through extra workouts.
I reviewed your science before I put that stuff in my body because I don't do well on cornstarch and stuff like that. And I've learned to avoid starch generally as a way to improve my performance. So I checked it out. I didn't sort of just order it and put it in my body because bad things happen when that happens, especially when it comes to flying on long flights. But your science is solid. It's really cool. And it's sort of like sugar and starch generally do bad things to people. And there's times you can use some of it. And after a heavy workout, you actually want to have some starch. I recommend like sweet potatoes and white rice as sources of starch. And if you get no starch, bad things happen too. But your approach, using it for fuel, is unique. Like I've not seen anything else like that. And I did read the science and said, all right, I'm quite intrigued enough to try it. And I have a canister of it on top of my fridge. I wouldn't say I take it every day, but it's something that I'm comfortable using. And when I'm going to do a heavy workout, which isn't that often, it's there on my list of things that it's pretty likely I could be doing.
So in terms of the use of, both resistant starch and UCAN specifically at night, what intrigues you about that, and what have you found?
There's several things that happen when you go to sleep, and I look across people who have sleep problems, and I used to have sleep problems. I sleep very robustly now, and one of the problems is going to sleep. Right? And sometimes that's like a fight or flight sympathetic activation thing, and not being starving, really hungry when you go to sleep will calm that to a certain point. So sometimes just having enough food is a good thing. But then you get these people who wake up in the middle of the night. And one of the reasons that can happen is they run out of energy. And in the book, I write about this fascinating new research about the glymphatic system in the body. And the glymphatic system is something that pumps cerebrospinal fluid around the brain. So at night, your brain basically changes its fluids. And this is really important for sleep. In fact, there's a new theory that the reason we sleep is to get rid of toxic brain proteins that build up when we're awake. So this kind of bathing and washing process happens, and it's driven by mitochondria, which are driven by glucose or ketones. So that means that if you run out of energy in the middle of the night, you're going to wake up and want a snack because you can't finish fixing your brain. You crashed. So one of the hacks in the book is to use like raw honey, just a couple teaspoons, to get liver glycogen. But that still causes a spike, and you get the triglycerides from the raw honey. Whereas if you're using superstarch to give yourself stable glucose while you're sleeping, if you're one of those people who has a mitochondrial problem that makes you wake up, then you're going to get better sleep. And I think your own studies have shown that people sleep better when they have some superstarch, right?
Yeah, Seth, anecdotally, anything you've heard from folks you've spoken to that have used it in this manner that Dave's talking about?
Yeah, we've got some folks that say it makes them sleep like a baby. It's all anecdotal, but what's interesting is that so many people have a bowl of ice cream, before bed, right? And if they wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, they're wondering why. And it's probably that they're coming down and they're, like you're talking about, running out of energy for their body to use.
There's a good way to verify that. Eat a low-fat ice cream instead. Because without the fat to at least give you some stability there, you're going to wake up, your sleep will be terrible. If you have hard candy before bed or something that's just straight sugar, that spike and crash, the crash is not going to make you feel good the next morning, and probably not in the middle of the night. Yeah. But if instead you were to do something like what you're doing, or what I would recommend, which is have a source of ketones and a source of starch. So I would do a superstarch and brain octane together. When I mix those things, then I'm getting the ketones and I'm getting the slow release glucose.
Yeah, we have some folks that take our plain UCAN, it's unflavored.
Mm-hmm.
They'll mix it with that brain octane type oil.
Yeah, I've done that.
And make it into a paste. And, there's a lot of times, especially you're talking about those cravings. If it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you've had lunch at 2 and it's 3 o'clock now and you're hungry again, using a source of fuel like UCAN is going to keep your blood sugar stable. So you're getting a really low calorie source to keep your blood sugar stable instead of having that granola bar, having that banana, having those things that are going to try to give you energy.
As we're talking about brain octane and bulletproof coffee, and how they can also work synergistically with UCAN and SuperStarch, Dave, what exactly is brain octane and what is bulletproof coffee for those that might not be familiar?
That's a good point. So bulletproof coffee is a recipe for it's a recipe for making a coffee that has no protein and no sugar, like nothing that's going to cause an insulin response in it. And it's made out of lab tested coffee beans that have no mold toxins in them. And this is important because when you drink things that have toxins in them, these are naturally occurring toxins from poor quality coffee processing, it actually increases demand for blood sugar in the body. So the liver wants that to oxidize the toxins as you're trying to get them out of your body. So it causes a blood sugar crash later in the day. So you get lab tested beans. Brain octane is an extract of coconut oil that goes to ketones most quickly. And ketones are one of the two kinds of energy bodies your mitochondria can burn, the other one being glucose. And then you add grass-fed butter. You blend it together and it's frothy and creamy. So people drink that because it gives them a source of ketones to burn for energy. So say during a fast, that works really well. But it's entirely possible, you guys have shown this, to have a source of glucose in the body and still stay in a state of ketosis. And using SuperStarch for that is intriguing. And I haven't, in my own case, done enough research to say, this is the exact dosage of this to recommend and all that. But I recognize that there's a definite possibility of doing it. And certainly from looking at what you guys have done with Peter Attia, it's a crazy idea, but it's a really good one, because my own experience of performing really well is I can go into ketosis and I feel good for a couple days, but then you want to come out of ketosis, right? But what if it's possible to be in ketosis and have adequate glucose all the time? That's probably going to piss off some people who are like, you should never eat any sugar ever, you should never have any carbs. But my own experience is that my sleep quality isn't good enough when I eat no carbs ever. So having a source of starch that isn't going to spike blood sugar, if nothing else, it's going to make you live longer. Because there's great research that says the postprandial spike, the spike in blood sugar that happens after you eat, it might only last for 20 minutes, but you can go up to 140, 180 sometimes, and then you're back to 120 or 110. But you want to live a long time, you want your levels to be around where mine are, 87. And you don't want them to go super high after a meal. So using your SuperStarch technology, it's real biohacking. It's pretty elegant.
What's fascinating, we've had a number of endurance athletes use sort of that combo of bulletproof coffee and SuperStarch as a pre-ride snack, meal almost, in a sense. They get that satiety from the bulletproof coffee and that slow release of glucose from the start. So they seem to work in a lot of ways very well synergistically together. Dave, I know you've got to head out to CNN. We appreciate you doing this with us, spending time with us. But in your own words, why should people check out the book?
Bulletproof Diet is a diet book about willpower and focus and about making life effortless. And it turns out that food is one of the big inputs that you have for that. So by taking control of your diet from the perspective of owning your own biology, you're capable of a lot more than you think you are. And having the ability to bring it at the end of the day, like we do now, I don't know, at 5 or 6 or some kind of o'clock in the evening. And I've been doing interviews all day long, like traipsing around New York. It's the day of my book launch, right? And you can tell I'm on. I didn't have that. It wasn't innate for me. And I believe it's innate for everyone when they get their food right. And this book is how to do it. So order bulletproofdietbook.com is the place to go to get all the info about how to get it. And I'll send you a bunch of free stuff too if you buy the book now.
Awesome. So that's orderbulletproofdietbook.com. I got that right. Yep. Orderbulletproofdietbook.com. You see that up on your screen now. We'll also have a very special offer on UCAN for all those that are listening. But Dave, just want to thank you big time for your time. And I think as you're on the verge, as this is coming out now, how excited are you about the potential, for other folks to experience the success that you've experienced with this diet?
I've never been more excited because when people turn off those cravings, they actually become nicer to each other. So people learn how to eat. We can actually build a kinder society, and I get to live in it, and that rocks.
That's awesome. He's Dave Asprey, a great guy, wealth of information. Dave, I have a feeling we could have gone 4 or 5 hours if we had the time, but this is only the beginning. We'll definitely look forward to getting Dave back here to chat about plenty of more fascinating topics. But yeah, check out the Bulletproof Diet by Dave Asprey. I'm very excited to sit on the couch and read it tonight. Seth, I know you got your copy as well. So Dave, we really thank you. Safe travels, and thanks so much for spending time with us.
My pleasure.